She was rejected for being paralyzed until a millionaire CEO did the unthinkable. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Hannah Cooper's life. The church was filled with 200 guests, family members who had traveled from across the country, childhood friends who had known Hannah since elementary school, colleagues from the marketing firm where she used to work before the accident. White roses lined every pew, their petals perfectly arranged by the florist Hannah had hired 6 months ago, when she could still walk down the street to the flower shop and smell each bouquet herself. Golden afternoon sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the marble floors. The organist was playing the wedding march. The pastor stood at the altar in his ceremonial robes, ready to officiate the ceremony that would bind Hannah Cooper to Ryan Blake for the rest of their lives. Before I continue with this story, I want you to tell me where you're watching from and what time is it. And if this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss my upcoming story. Everything was exactly as Hannah had planned it during the 3 years of their engagement. Everything was perfect, except for one devastating detail that changed everything. Hannah wasn't walking down that aisle toward her future husband. She was being wheeled down it in a chair that had become both her prison and her survival tool over the past 6 months. The accident had happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Hannah had been driving home from work, singing along to a song on the radio, thinking about what to make for dinner. She never saw the drunk driver run the red light. One moment she was at a complete stop at an intersection, and the next moment a pickup truck slammed into the driver's side of her sedan at 50 miles per hour. The impact was so violent that her car spun 3 times before crashing into a telephone pole. Paramedics had to cut her out of the wreckage with specialized equipment. She was unconscious when they loaded her into the ambulance. She woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed with her parents crying beside her and a doctor explaining that she had severe spinal cord damage. The vertebrae in her lower back had been fractured. The nerves that controlled her legs had been compressed and damaged. Surgery had stabilized her spine, but the damage to her nervous system was significant. "Will I walk again?" Hannah had asked the doctor, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed hours earlier. The doctor had hesitated in that way doctors do when they don't want to destroy hope, but also can't lie. "It's possible," he'd said carefully. "With intensive physical therapy and time, some patients regain partial or full mobility. But I have to be honest with you, Hannah. The damage is severe. It could take years of rehabilitation. Some patients never fully recover. We'll know more as you progress through therapy, but right now you need to focus on healing and accepting that your life is going to look different for a while, maybe permanently." That word, permanently, had echoed in Hannah's mind for weeks. The idea that she might never walk again, never run, never dance, never do any of the things she'd taken for granted her entire life was almost too much to bear. But through all the pain and fear and uncertainty, Hannah had clung to one source of hope. Ryan Blake, her fiancé of 3 years, had promised her that nothing would change between them. He'd sat beside her hospital bed every single day during her 2-week stay. He'd held her hand through the grueling physical therapy sessions, where therapists pushed her body to its limits, trying to stimulate nerve response. He'd driven her to every follow-up appointment with the neurologist. When Hannah had cried and said they should postpone the wedding, Ryan had kissed her forehead and told her absolutely not. "We're getting married in September, just like we planned," Ryan had said firmly. "A wheelchair doesn't change how I feel about you. In sickness and in health, remember? That's what we're promising each other. This is just the sickness part coming a little earlier than expected." Hannah had believed him completely. She'd trusted that their love was strong enough to withstand this challenge. So they'd kept their wedding date. They'd adjusted the ceremony plans to accommodate Hannah's wheelchair, a ramp installed at the church entrance. The aisle widened so her father could wheel her down it. The altar area cleared so she could position herself beside Ryan without struggling. They'd told everyone that their commitment to each other was unshakable, that true love didn't crumble just because life got difficult. But standing in the church's bridal preparation room on the morning of the wedding, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror, Hannah had felt the first real stirrings of doubt. Her wedding dress was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate lace detailing on the bodice and sleeves, a dress she'd chosen 9 months ago when she'd been able to stand in the bridal shop and twirl in front of the mirrors. The seamstress had done her best to alter it for the wheelchair, but the fabric still bunched awkwardly around Hannah's legs. Her veil was pinned perfectly in her dark hair. Her makeup had been professionally done. She looked like a bride, but she felt like an imposter. Hannah's mother stood behind her, adjusting the veil with trembling hands. Patricia Cooper had been crying on and off all morning, and not with the happy tears mothers are supposed to shed on their daughter's wedding day. These were tears of worry and heartbreak, and a mother's instinct that something was terribly wrong. "Sweetheart," Patricia said quietly, meeting Hannah's eyes in the mirror. "Are you absolutely sure about this? Because if you have any doubts at all, we can stop this right now. I don't care how many people are out there, or how much money we've spent. Your happiness matters more than anything." Hannah forced a smile, even though her stomach was churning with anxiety. "I'm sure, Mom. I love Ryan. He loves me. Everything's going to be fine." But even as she said the words, Hannah's hands were shaking, because Ryan had barely looked at her during the rehearsal dinner the night before. He'd sat at the head table making small talk with his groomsmen, while Hannah sat beside him feeling invisible. When she'd tried to hold his hand under the table, he'd pulled away after just a few seconds, claiming he needed to refill his drink. His parents, Catherine and Richard Blake, had spent the entire evening shooting disapproving glances at Hannah's wheelchair. They'd made pointed comments about how different the ceremony would look, and how unfortunate it was that the wedding photos wouldn't be traditional. Hannah had tried to ignore the warning signs. She'd tried to convince herself that Ryan was just nervous about the wedding, that his distance was normal pre-wedding jitters, that his parents' coldness didn't matter because Ryan loved her. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, Hannah had known something was wrong. The wedding coordinator knocked on the preparation room door. "It's time," she announced with forced cheerfulness. "The guests are all seated. The groom and groomsmen are in position. We're ready to start." Hannah's father, David Cooper, entered the room. He was wearing his best suit and a boutonniere that matched Hannah's bouquet of white roses. His eyes were red, and Hannah realized he'd been crying too. David had always been her protector, her biggest supporter, the man who taught her to ride a bike and helped her with math homework and walked her through every challenge life had thrown at her. He knelt down beside Hannah's wheelchair and took both her hands in his. "Hannah," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion, "you don't have to do this. If you want to leave right now, I'll wheel you out the back door and we'll drive away and never look back. I'll handle everything. The guests, the explanations, all of it. You just say the word." Hannah looked at her father's worried face and felt her heart crack, but she shook her head. "I have to do this, Dad. I love him. He promised he'd stand by me. I believe him." David Cooper looked like he wanted to argue, but he simply nodded and stood up. He moved behind Hannah's wheelchair and gripped the handles. The wedding coordinator opened the sanctuary doors, and the sound of the wedding march filled the air. The sanctuary was packed. 200 faces turned to look at Hannah as the doors swung open. She could see her grandmother in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. She could see her college roommate and her co-workers and her cousins. She could see Ryan's extended family filling the pews on the other side of the aisle. And at the end of that impossibly long aisle, standing at the altar beside the pastor and 6 groomsmen, was Ryan Blake. Ryan was 29 years old, tall and handsome in his tailored tuxedo. He'd been Hannah's college sweetheart. They'd met during their junior year at the University of Washington, where Ryan had been studying business and Hannah had been majoring in graphic design. He'd asked her out after a campus charity event, where they'd both been volunteers. Their first date had been coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into walking around Seattle until midnight talking about their dreams. Ryan had wanted to work in commercial real estate development. Hannah had wanted to start her own design agency. They'd supported each other through finals and job searches, and the terrifying transition from college to adult life. When Ryan had proposed on a beach at sunset 3 years ago, Hannah had been certain she was marrying her best friend and soulmate. But the man standing at that altar wasn't looking at her the way a groom should look at his bride. Ryan's expression wasn't joy or love or anticipation. It was something else. Something that made Hannah's blood run cold. Uncertainty. Hesitation. something that looked almost like dread. David began wheeling Hannah down the aisle. Each rotation of the wheelchair's wheels felt like it took an eternity. Hannah could hear whispers rippling through the crowd. She could feel 200 pairs of eyes on her, assessing her, pitying her. She forced herself to smile and keep her eyes on Ryan, willing him to smile back, willing him to look at her with love. But Ryan wasn't looking at her at all. He was looking at his parents. Catherine and Richard Blake were seated in the front pew on the groom's side. Catherine was wearing an expensive navy dress and a tight expression that looked like she'd just smelled something unpleasant. Richard sat beside her with his arms crossed, his face completely closed off. As Hannah was wheeled past them, she heard Catherine lean toward her husband and whisper something that made Hannah's heart stop. "I told him this was a mistake. I told him not to go through with it." Hannah's breath caught in her throat, but her father kept wheeling her forward. They were halfway down the aisle now. The pastor was watching them approach with an uncomfortable expression. The groomsman was shifting awkwardly, and Ryan still wasn't looking at her. Then something happened that would become seared into Hannah's memory forever. Just as David wheeled Hannah to within 10 feet of the altar, Catherine and Richard Blake stood up abruptly. They walked directly to Ryan, right there in front of everyone, and pulled him aside to a corner near the altar. The wedding march was still playing. The guests were still watching. Hannah's father parked her wheelchair at the designated spot and stepped to the side. The music ended. Silence fell over the sanctuary, but Ryan was still huddled with his parents. Hannah could see Catherine speaking urgently to her son, her perfectly manicured hand gripping his arm. She could see Richard's hand on Ryan's shoulder, squeezing hard, his mouth moving rapidly as he spoke in harsh whispers. The words were too quiet for most of the church to hear, but Hannah was close enough to catch fragments. "What people will think. Family image. Can't expect you to. Not what you signed up for." 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. The sanctuary was absolutely silent except for the sound of people shifting uncomfortably in the pews. The pastor cleared his throat awkwardly. Hannah's hands trembled around her bouquet of white roses, their stems cutting into her palms. Her mother made a move to go to her, but Hannah's father held her back with one hand, his face pale and furious. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably less than 2 minutes, Ryan pulled away from his parents. He straightened his tuxedo jacket and walked toward Hannah, but he didn't take his place beside her at the altar like he was supposed to. Instead, he knelt down directly in front of her wheelchair so that his face was level with hers. Hannah's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might break through her chest. "Ryan," she whispered, "what's going on?" Ryan looked at her with an expression Hannah would never forget for the rest of her life. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was worse than cruelty. It was pity mixed with resignation, mixed with relief that he was about to escape something he no longer wanted. "I can't do this," Ryan said. His voice was quiet, but in the deathly silent sanctuary, every single person heard him clearly. Hannah felt the world tilt beneath her. "What?" "I can't marry you," Ryan said, and he actually had the audacity to look apologetic. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I really am. But I can't do this. I can't marry someone like this." Someone like this. The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. "But you promised," Hannah said, her voice breaking. "You promised me you'd stand by me no matter what. You said the wheelchair didn't change anything." "I thought I could do it," Ryan said, glancing back at his parents, who were watching with grim satisfaction. "I really thought I could, but my parents made me see reality. This isn't what I imagined for my life. This isn't the future I wanted. You're not the person I fell in love with anymore." "I'm exactly the same person," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face now. "The only thing that's changed is that I use a wheelchair. Everything else about me is the same. My personality, my heart, my love for you. None of that changed." "But you did change," Ryan insisted, "and I can't spend my life taking care of someone who can't even walk. I'm 29 years old. I have a career to build. I can't be a caretaker. My parents are right. I deserve better than this." The words hung in the air like poison. Hannah stared at the man she'd loved for years, the man she'd planned to spend her life with, and she didn't recognize him, or maybe she was finally seeing him clearly for the first time. "Please," Hannah whispered, hating herself for begging but unable to stop. "Ryan, please don't do this. Not like this. Not in front of everyone." Ryan stood up. He looked at the pastor. "There's not going to be a wedding today," he announced to the entire church. "I'm sorry for wasting everyone's time." Then he turned and walked away. He walked down that aisle past 200 shocked faces, past Hannah's sobbing mother and furious father, past friends who couldn't believe what they were witnessing, past his own parents who followed him quickly with their heads held high like they'd just won some kind of victory. The heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary slammed shut behind them with a sound like a gunshot, and Hannah sat there, alone at the altar, in her ivory silk wedding dress with the lace sleeves, holding her bouquet of white roses that were already starting to wilt, sitting in the wheelchair that had just cost her everything. The sanctuary was absolutely silent. Not a single person moved. Not a single person spoke. 200 people just sat there staring at her. The rejected bride, the girl in the wheelchair, the woman who wasn't good enough. Hannah's vision blurred with tears. The roses fell from her shaking hands and scattered across the marble floor, their petals crushing under the weight of this moment. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She couldn't process what had just happened. Finally, blessedly, her mother broke free from her father's grip and rushed forward. Patricia grabbed the handles of Hannah's wheelchair and pushed her quickly out of the sanctuary through a side door, away from the staring eyes and the suffocating pity and the worst moment of Hannah's entire life. The days that followed the wedding that never happened were a nightmare that Hannah couldn't wake up from. She stayed in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, unable to face going back to the apartment she'd shared with Ryan. That apartment was filled with reminders of the life they'd built together. Framed photos from their vacations, the couch they'd picked out together at a furniture store, the kitchen where they'd cooked dinner side by side, the bed where they'd made love and talked about their future. Hannah couldn't bear to see any of it. She couldn't bear to pack up 3 years of memories and figure out where to put all that love that now had nowhere to go. Her mother brought meals on trays, but Hannah barely touched them. Food tasted like ash. Everything tasted like ash. Patricia would sit on the edge of Hannah's bed and stroke her hair like she'd done when Hannah was a little girl with nightmares, but there was no soothing this. There was no waking up from this particular nightmare. Hannah's father spent hours pacing the hallway outside her room, his footsteps heavy with rage. David Cooper had never been a violent man, but in those first days after the wedding, he'd seriously considered driving to the Blake family home and making Ryan answer for what he'd done. Only Patricia's pleading had stopped him. "It won't help Hannah," she'd said. "It'll only make things worse." Hannah's friends tried to reach out. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and text messages. Her college roommate Melissa called 15 times in 2 days. Her work friends sent long messages about how terrible Ryan was and how Hannah deserved so much better. Her cousins offered to come stay with her, but Hannah couldn't bring herself to answer any of them. What could she possibly say? That she'd been publicly humiliated by the man she loved. That she'd been rejected in front of 200 people because her legs didn't work anymore. That she felt like less than human, like damaged goods, like someone who would never be loved. The story spread through their small hometown like wildfire. In a town of just 12,000 people, everyone knew everyone else's business. Within 48 hours, everyone knew what had happened at St. Michael's Church. The rejected bride, the girl in the wheelchair, the wedding that never happened. Hannah could feel the weight of the town's pity even from inside her locked bedroom. Her mother reported that people were whispering in the grocery store. Conversations stopped when Patricia walked down the aisles. The checker had given her a sympathetic look and said, "I'm so sorry about Hannah," in a voice dripping with pity that made Patricia want to scream. 2 weeks after the wedding, Hannah made a decision. She couldn't stay in this town. She couldn't live in a place where everyone knew her as the bride who'd been left at the altar. Every person she passed on the street would look at her with sympathy or judgment or curiosity. Every trip to the bank or the post office would be an exercise in humiliation. She couldn't build a new life while living in the ruins of her old one. She told her parents she was leaving. Patricia cried and begged her to stay. "You need us right now," her mother insisted. "You need family. You can't just run away from this." But David understood. He'd seen the way his daughter had withered over the past 2 weeks, retreating further and further into herself. He'd seen the light go out of her eyes. He knew that sometimes leaving is the only way to survive. "Where will you go?" David asked Hannah one evening as he helped her pack boxes in her bedroom. "Somewhere no one knows me," Hannah said. She was folding clothes mechanically, her movements slow and deliberate. "Somewhere I can start over." Hannah had some money saved, about $15,000 in her personal account. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent an apartment and live modestly for a few months while she figured things out. Before the accident, Hannah had been working as a graphic designer at a marketing firm in town. The work had been steady and paid well. After the accident, her boss had told her to take all the time she needed, and then had quietly hired someone else to take over her projects. Hannah had received the termination paperwork 2 weeks before the wedding. They'd claimed it was downsizing, but Hannah knew the truth. They didn't want to deal with the complications of an employee in a wheelchair. But Hannah had skills. She'd been working as a freelance designer on the side for years, taking on small projects for extra money. She had a portfolio of work and a laptop and design software. She could do that work from anywhere with an internet connection. She didn't need an office. She didn't need to interact with co-workers who would pity her. She could work from home and build a quiet life somewhere far away from here. Hannah spent hours researching small towns on the West Coast. She wanted somewhere peaceful, somewhere with a slower pace of life, somewhere she could disappear. She ruled out California, too expensive, too crowded. She ruled out Washington, too close to Seattle, too many memories of her college years with Ryan. That left Oregon. She found a town called Seabrook on the Oregon coast. Population 8,000, small enough to be quiet and peaceful, big enough that one woman in a wheelchair wouldn't be the subject of constant attention. The town had accessible housing options, which was crucial. Hannah needed a ground-floor apartment with wide doorways and a roll-in shower. She found a listing online for a small one-bedroom apartment just 3 blocks from the beach. The rent was affordable. The landlord didn't ask too many questions when Hannah called to inquire. "I can mail you the lease agreement," the landlord, a woman named Margaret, said. "When are you looking to move in?" "As soon as possible," Hannah replied. 3 weeks after the worst day of her life, Hannah Cooper packed everything she owned into her car. Her father had insisted on buying her a used van with a wheelchair lift installed, making it easier for her to get in and out without assistance. Hannah loaded boxes of clothes, her laptop and work equipment, a few books and almost nothing else. She left behind the wedding gifts that had been piling up in her parents' garage, crystal vases and kitchen appliances and picture frames that would never hold wedding photos. She left behind the ivory silk wedding dress that hung in her closet like a ghost. She left behind every reminder of the life she'd thought she would have. Her parents stood in the driveway as Hannah prepared to leave. Patricia was crying openly. David had his arm around his wife's shoulders, his jaw tight as he tried to hold himself together. "Call us every day," Patricia said. "Promise me you'll call." "I promise, Mom," Hannah said, though she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. She wasn't sure she could talk to anyone about anything for a long time. David leaned into the driver's side window. "Hannah, listen to me. What Ryan did to you, that wasn't about you. That was about him being too weak and too small to handle real life. You're going to get through this. You're stronger than you know." Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The drive from her hometown to Seabrook, Oregon, took 3 full days. Hannah drove slowly, taking frequent breaks because sitting in the driver's seat for too long made her back ache where the damaged vertebrae had been surgically repaired. She stayed in budget hotels along the way, always making sure to call ahead and confirm they had accessible rooms. Some hotels claimed to be accessible but weren't really. She'd learned that lesson the hard way during physical therapy appointments when she'd tried to stay overnight near the rehabilitation center. One hotel had claimed to have a roll-in shower, but actually just had a regular bathtub with grab bars, which was completely useless for someone who couldn't step over the tub's edge. Hannah ate alone in roadside diners, picking at French fries and grilled cheese sandwiches, while truck drivers and traveling salesmen occupied the other booths. Nobody paid much attention to her, which was exactly what she wanted. Anonymity felt like a gift after weeks of being stared at and whispered about. She cried in her car at rest stops when the weight of everything became too much to carry. Sometimes she'd pull into a parking area overlooking a valley or a forest and just sit there with tears streaming down her face, wondering how her life had fallen apart so completely. She'd had a plan. She'd had a future. She was supposed to be on her honeymoon right now, lying on a beach somewhere with her husband, making love and drinking cocktails and planning the rest of their lives together. Instead, she was driving alone to a town where she didn't know a single person, running away from a humiliation so deep it felt like it would never stop hurting. But Hannah kept driving, because going back wasn't an option. Going back meant facing everyone who'd witnessed her rejection. Going back meant living in a town where people would always see her as the girl who wasn't good enough, the bride who'd been abandoned, the woman in the wheelchair that even her fiancé couldn't love. When Hannah finally reached Seabrook on the third day, it was late afternoon. The town was exactly as she'd imagined from the photos she'd seen online, small and quiet, with a main street lined with local shops and cafes. The ocean was visible from almost everywhere, a constant presence of grey-blue water stretching to the horizon. The air smelled like salt and pine trees. The pace of life seemed slower here, gentler. People walked instead of rushed. Nobody seemed to be in a hurry. Hannah found her new apartment building easily. It was a small complex with just 8 units, painted pale yellow with white trim. The building was old but well maintained, with a ramp leading to the entrance and wide hallways that could easily accommodate her wheelchair. Margaret, the landlord, was waiting for her in the parking lot. She was a woman in her 60s with grey hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "You must be Hannah," Margaret said, walking over to the van as Hannah opened the door and began the process of lowering the wheelchair lift. "I am," Hannah said. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course, dear. Let me show you the apartment. I think you'll find it suits your needs perfectly." The apartment was small but functional, one bedroom with large windows overlooking a small garden, a living room with enough space for Hannah's wheelchair to maneuver easily, a kitchen with lowered countertops that had been specifically designed for wheelchair accessibility, and most importantly, a bathroom with a roll-in shower, grab bars, and enough space to transfer safely. The previous tenant was also in a wheelchair, Margaret explained as she showed Hannah around. She lived here for 15 years before moving to be closer to her daughter. I've kept all the accessibility features in place because I figured someone else would need them eventually. "It's perfect," Hannah said, and she meant it. For the first time in weeks, something felt right. This apartment wouldn't remind her of Ryan. This town wouldn't whisper about her humiliation. Here she could start over. Here she could just be Hannah Cooper, graphic designer, nothing more and nothing less. Over the next few weeks, Hannah settled into her new life in Seabrook. She unpacked her belongings and arranged her small apartment to be both comfortable and functional. She set up her desk in the corner of the living room where the natural light was best for working on design projects. She stocked her kitchen with simple groceries, nothing fancy, just basics. She established routines that made life feel manageable. Every morning she'd wake up at 7 and do the stretching exercises her physical therapist had prescribed. Then she'd make coffee and work on freelance design projects until noon. She'd take a break for lunch, usually something simple like a sandwich or soup. Then she'd work until 5, when she'd close her laptop and try to figure out how to fill the empty evening hours. Hannah had always been social before the accident. She'd had a wide circle of friends. She'd gone to dinner parties and game nights and weekend brunches. But here in Seabrook, she knew no one. And after what had happened with Ryan, she wasn't sure she wanted to know anyone. Trust had become something precious and fragile, something she couldn't afford to give away easily. For the first month, Hannah barely left her apartment except for necessities. She ordered most of her groceries online and had them delivered. She attended physical therapy appointments at a clinic in town, but she kept her interactions with the therapists strictly professional. She worked on her design projects and ignored the loneliness that crept in during the quiet moments. But slowly, very slowly, Hannah began to emerge from her self-imposed isolation. She started taking her morning coffee at a small cafe 3 blocks from her apartment called the Coastal Grind. The cafe had a ramp entrance and plenty of space between tables, making it easy to navigate in her wheelchair. The barista, a young woman named Sophie with pink streaks in her hair, was friendly without being intrusive. "Morning regular?" Sophie would ask when Hannah wheeled through the door. "Please," Hannah would reply. "Medium latte, extra foam." Sophie never asked personal questions. She never stared at the wheelchair. She just made excellent coffee and occasionally commented on the weather or recommended a pastry. It was exactly the kind of interaction Hannah could handle. One particularly rainy afternoon in October, about 6 weeks after Hannah had moved to Seabrook, everything changed. Hannah had been working all morning on a logo design for a small business client. By 2 in the afternoon, she desperately needed a break and some caffeine. She grabbed her jacket and headed to the Coastal Grind. The rain was coming down hard, turning the sidewalks slick and treacherous. Hannah had learned to be extra careful in wet weather because her wheelchair's wheels could slip on slick surfaces. She made it to the cafe without incident and ordered her usual latte from Sophie. But when she was leaving 20 minutes later, balancing her coffee cup in her lap while trying to open the heavy cafe door, she ran into trouble. The wheelchair ramp outside the cafe was slick with rain. Hannah tried to push herself up it, but her wheels spun uselessly on the wet surface. She tried again, pushing harder, but she couldn't get enough traction. The wheelchair started to slide backward. Hannah's heart jumped into her throat. If she slid all the way down the ramp, she'd end up in the street where cars were passing by. She tried to grab the ramp's handrail, but she couldn't reach it from her current angle. Panic started to set in, and then suddenly someone was there. A man in a grey suit appeared beside her, moving quickly but not frantically. He positioned himself behind her wheelchair and gripped the handles. "I've got you," he said calmly. "Just hold on." He pushed her wheelchair up the ramp smoothly, his strength making it look effortless. At the top, he carefully positioned her on level ground and stepped back. Hannah turned to look at her rescuer. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair that was getting soaked in the rain. His grey suit was expensive. Even Hannah's untrained eye could tell that. But what struck her most was his face. He had warm brown eyes and a gentle expression that held no pity, no awkwardness, just genuine concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," Hannah said, trying to catch her breath. "Thank you. That ramp is a nightmare when it's wet." "The city should put some kind of non-slip coating on it," the man said, glancing back at the ramp with a frown. "That's a safety hazard." Hannah found herself smiling slightly despite her embarrassment. "You're not wrong." The man smiled back, and something about that smile made Hannah's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear or panic. "I'm Lucas," he said, extending his hand. Hannah shook it. "Hannah? Well, Hannah, I'm glad I was walking by at the right moment." Lucas glanced up at the rain, which was getting heavier. "Are you headed home? I have an umbrella if you need one." "I live just a few blocks away," Hannah said. "I'll be fine." But Lucas was already pulling a large umbrella from his briefcase and opening it. He held it over Hannah's head. "At least let me walk you to the corner. I'm going that direction anyway." Hannah wanted to say no. She wanted to insist she didn't need help. She'd spent the last 2 months building walls around herself, protecting herself from the vulnerability of needing other people. But there was something about Lucas's easy kindness that made those walls feel less necessary. "Okay," she said, "thank you." They moved down the sidewalk together, Lucas holding the umbrella over Hannah and getting partially soaked himself in the process. "Have you lived in Seabrook long?" Lucas asked as they walked. "About 6 weeks," Hannah replied. "I moved here from Washington." "Ah, I'm new too," Lucas said. "Just got here last month. I'm temporarily escaping the chaos of New York." "New York," Hannah repeated. "That's a big change. What brought you to a small town in Oregon?" Lucas hesitated, and Hannah saw something flicker across his face, something that looked like exhaustion or maybe pain. "Work stuff," he said vaguely. "Sometimes you need to step away from your normal life for a while and figure things out." Hannah understood that sentiment better than he could possibly know. "I get that," she said quietly. They reached the corner where Hannah's street intersected with the main road. "This is me," Hannah said, pointing down the residential street lined with small houses and apartment buildings. "Will you be okay from here?" Lucas asked. "I'll be fine," Hannah assured him. "Thank you again for helping me with the ramp and for the umbrella escort," Lucas smiled. "Anytime. Maybe I'll see you around." "Maybe," Hannah said. She wheeled herself down her street, aware that Lucas was standing at the corner watching to make sure she got home safely. When she reached her apartment building and glanced back, he waved before turning and walking away. Hannah sat in her apartment for a long time after that encounter, staring out the window at the rain and thinking about the man named Lucas. There had been something different about him. Something that made her feel seen without feeling pitied. Something that made her want to trust again, even though trust was the last thing she should be offering to anyone. Over the next 2 weeks, Hannah kept running into Lucas. At first, she thought it was coincidence. She saw him at the Coastal Grind one morning, sitting at a corner table with his laptop and a cup of black coffee. He waved when he saw her, and she waved back. Then she saw him at the small bookstore on Main Street, where she'd gone to browse graphic design books. He was in the business section, reading the back cover of a book about leadership. "We have to stop meeting like this," Lucas joked when he spotted her. "Small town," Hannah replied with a smile. They ended up having coffee together after that bookstore encounter. Lucas asked about her work, and Hannah found herself talking about graphic design with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in months. She told him about her favorite projects and the clients she enjoyed working with. Lucas listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about her creative process. "What do you do?" Hannah asked eventually. "You mentioned escaping from New York, but you never said what you were escaping from." Lucas looked uncomfortable for a moment. "I work in tech," he said vaguely. "Company management stuff. It's not very interesting." Hannah sensed he was downplaying something, but she didn't push. She understood the desire to not be defined by your work. Over the following weeks, their casual encounters became more regular. They started meeting for coffee intentionally rather than by accident. Lucas would text her in the morning. Hannah had given him her number after their third coffee meeting and asked if she wanted to grab lunch at the sandwich shop near the pier. They'd spend an hour talking about books and movies and their opinions on whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Lucas never once treated Hannah like she was fragile or broken. He never stared at her wheelchair or asked invasive questions about her disability. He opened doors for her, not because she was in a wheelchair, but because he was the kind of person who opened doors for everyone. He made her laugh with his dry sense of humor. He listened when she talked. He made her feel like a person, not a tragedy. Hannah found herself looking forward to their meetings with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. Because for the first time since Ryan had destroyed her at that altar, she was feeling something other than pain. She was feeling hope, and hope was dangerous. Hope could hurt you worse than anything else. One evening in mid-November, Lucas invited Hannah to dinner. Not coffee or lunch, but actual dinner at a nice restaurant. Hannah hesitated when he asked. "I don't know," she said, anxiety rising in her chest. "That feels like a date?" Lucas finished gently. Hannah nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Lucas reached across the coffee shop table and touched her hand briefly. "Hannah, I like spending time with you. I'd like to spend more time with you in nicer settings than coffee shops. But if you're not ready for that, I understand. We can keep things exactly as they are." Hannah looked at his face, at the genuine kindness there, at the patience. She thought about Ryan and the humiliation, and the promise she'd made to herself that she'd never trust anyone with her heart again. But she also thought about the past few weeks with Lucas, the way he made her laugh, the way he saw her, the way he made her feel alive again. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Dinner sounds nice." Lucas's face broke into a wide smile. "Yeah?" "Yeah," Hannah confirmed, smiling back despite her nerves. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday evening at an Italian restaurant called Angelo's that Lucas said had incredible pasta. Hannah spent the entire day leading up to the dinner second-guessing her decision. She tried on 3 different outfits before settling on a deep blue dress that she'd brought from her old life but never worn. She did her makeup carefully, trying to hide the dark circles under her eyes that came from months of poor sleep. She styled her hair in loose waves around her shoulders. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she almost looked like the old Hannah, the Hannah from before the accident, the Hannah who believed in love and happy endings. Lucas picked her up at 6:30. He arrived at her apartment in a dark sedan, and when she opened the door, his face lit up. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Hannah replied, feeling her cheeks heat. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Lucas was wearing dark slacks and a button-down shirt that made him look both professional and approachable. He helped Hannah with her coat and held the door as she wheeled herself out to his car. The restaurant was lovely. Dim lighting, candles on every table, the smell of garlic and fresh bread filling the air. The hostess seated them at a quiet table near the back, making sure there was plenty of room for Hannah's wheelchair. They ordered wine and pasta and talked for hours. Lucas told her more about his life in New York, carefully editing out certain details that Hannah sensed were important but wasn't ready to ask about. Hannah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She told Lucas about her design work and her hopes of eventually starting her own agency. She told him about growing up in a small town and what it had been like to be the kid who was always drawing instead of playing sports. But she didn't tell him about Ryan. She didn't tell him about the wedding or the humiliation or the reason she'd run away to Oregon. That wound was still too fresh, too raw. Partway through dinner, Lucas asked the question Hannah had been dreading. "Can I ask what happened?" he said gently. "The accident that put you in the wheelchair." Hannah took a sip of her wine, buying time. "Car accident," she said finally. 6 months ago. Drunk driver ran a red light, spinal cord damage." "I'm sorry," Lucas said, and his sympathy sounded genuine, not performative. "It is what it is," Hannah said with a shrug she didn't feel. "I'm learning to adapt." "You're doing more than adapting," Lucas said. "You moved to a new town by yourself, built a freelance business, and you're navigating life with a strength that most people couldn't manage." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Some days are harder than others." "I imagine they are," Lucas said. There was a comfortable silence for a moment, and then Lucas changed the subject to something lighter. They talked about their favorite childhood memories and debated whether autumn or spring was the better season. By the time dessert arrived, Hannah realized she was having the best evening she'd had in months, maybe years. Lucas made her feel seen and valued and interesting. He made her feel like someone worth knowing. When he drove her home and walked her to her apartment door, Hannah felt nervousness flutter in her stomach. "I had a really nice time tonight," she said. "So did I," Lucas replied. "Can we do this again?" "I'd like that," Hannah said honestly. Lucas smiled, and then he leaned down and kissed her on the cheek. It was brief and gentle and respectful, but it sent warmth flooding through Hannah's entire body. "Good night, Hannah," Lucas said softly. "Good night, Lucas." Hannah wheeled herself inside and closed the door behind her. She sat in her living room in the dark for a long time, touching her cheek where Lucas had kissed her and feeling something she thought was gone forever. She was feeling hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe her life wasn't over, that maybe she could love again, that maybe someone could love her back. But what Hannah didn't know, what Lucas hadn't told her, was who he really was. Lucas Grant wasn't just someone escaping the chaos of New York. He was Lucas Grant, founder and CEO of Tech Core Solutions, one of the most successful technology companies in America. His face had been on the cover of Forbes magazine. His company was worth billions. He'd been hiding in Seabrook after a very public business fallout with his board of directors, trying to figure out his next move away from cameras and reporters. He'd been using this small town as a refuge, and he'd found something he hadn't expected. He'd found Hannah, a woman who had no idea who he was, a woman who saw him as just Lucas, not Lucas Grant, the CEO, a woman who made him feel like a person instead of a portfolio. Lucas knew he should tell her the truth, but every time he thought about it, he hesitated. Because what if telling her changed everything? What if she looked at him differently once she knew about the money and the power and the public persona? What if she thought he'd been deceiving her? So Lucas kept his secret, and he kept falling for Hannah Cooper, the woman in the wheelchair who'd reminded him what it felt like to be truly seen. Over the next month, Hannah and Lucas's relationship deepened in ways that both excited and terrified Hannah. They spent almost every day together. Lucas would pick her up in the mornings, and they'd have breakfast at the coastal grind before Hannah started her workday. They'd meet for lunch at the pier, eating fish and chips while watching seagulls circle overhead. In the evenings, they'd cook dinner together in Hannah's small kitchen. Lucas turned out to be a surprisingly good cook, having learned from his mother, who'd insisted that every person should know how to feed themselves properly. He'd make pasta from scratch while Hannah chopped vegetables, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. They watched movies on Hannah's couch, Lucas respecting her space but sitting close enough that Hannah could feel his warmth. They took walks along the beach, Lucas pushing Hannah's wheelchair through the sand when it got too difficult for her to manage on her own. For the first time since the accident, Hannah felt like she was living instead of just surviving. Lucas made her laugh with his terrible jokes. He listened to her dreams about starting her own design agency someday. He encouraged her to take on bigger freelance projects and helped her negotiate better rates with clients who were trying to lowball her. He never once made her feel like her wheelchair was an obstacle or a burden. When they encountered places that weren't accessible, Lucas didn't make a big deal about it. He'd simply suggest somewhere else, treating it as a practical matter rather than a tragedy. Hannah found herself falling for him in a way that felt both familiar and completely new. It was different from what she'd felt for Ryan. With Ryan, love had felt safe and predictable, built on years of shared history and comfortable routines. With Lucas, love felt like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. But there was one thing that kept Hannah from fully surrendering to these feelings. She still hadn't told Lucas about Ryan and the wedding. She'd talked about the accident, but she'd never mentioned the humiliation that came after. She'd never told him about being rejected at the altar or fleeing to Oregon to escape the shame. Part of her knew she needed to tell him, but another part of her was afraid that once he knew she'd been deemed unworthy by someone else, he might start to see her that way too. One evening in early December, as they were finishing dinner at Hannah's apartment, Lucas brought up something that made Hannah's stomach drop. "There's an event I need to attend next week," Lucas said, setting down his fork. "It's a business thing, a gala for a youth center charity that I've been supporting." Hannah felt anxiety spike in her chest. "A gala? Yeah. It's going to be pretty formal. Lots of people from the business community." Lucas reached across the table and took Hannah's hand. "I'd really like it if you'd come with me, as my date." Hannah's mind immediately went to the last time she'd been to a formal event, her wedding day. 200 people watching her get rejected, the humiliation, the stares. "I don't know," Hannah said, pulling her hand back. "That's not really my scene." "Hannah," Lucas said gently, "I know big events can be overwhelming, especially with accessibility concerns. But I promise I'll be with you the whole time, and if at any point you want to leave, we'll leave, no questions asked." "It's not about accessibility," Hannah said, though that was part of it. It was about the terror of being in a room full of people who would look at her and see only the wheelchair, people who would judge her, people who would wonder what a successful man like Lucas was doing with someone like her. "Then what is it about?" Lucas asked. Hannah looked at him, at his kind face and patient expression, and she knew she couldn't keep avoiding this conversation. "There's something I haven't told you," she said quietly, "about why I moved to Seabrook." Lucas waited, giving her space to continue. Hannah took a deep breath. "The car accident happened 6 months before I moved here. I spent months in physical therapy, learning to navigate life in a wheelchair. Through all of that, I was engaged to someone. We'd been together for 3 years. His name was Ryan." Lucas's expression shifted slightly, understanding starting to dawn. "We kept our wedding date even after the accident," Hannah continued, her voice shaking now. "Ryan promised he'd stand by me. He said the wheelchair didn't change anything. I believed him. But on the wedding day, right there at the altar in front of 200 people, he changed his mind." "Hannah," Lucas breathed. "His parents convinced him that marrying someone in a wheelchair would be bad for his image. bad for his career, that he deserved better than a damaged wife. The words came out bitter. So he told me he couldn't marry someone like this, and he walked away. He left me sitting there at the altar in front of everyone we knew. Lucas's face had gone dark with anger. He what? I was humiliated, Hannah said, tears starting to fall now. Everyone saw it happen. Everyone witnessed him rejecting me because I can't walk. So I left. I packed up everything and drove here to get away from the pity and the whispers and the constant reminder that I wasn't good enough. Lucas stood up and moved around the table. He knelt down in front of Hannah's wheelchair, taking both her hands in his. Listen to me, he said fiercely. What that man did to you says everything about him and nothing about you. He was a coward. He was weak. He didn't deserve you. But he was right in a way, Hannah said. I'm not the same person I was before the accident. I can't do all the things I used to do. I need accommodations and help and— Stop, Lucas interrupted. Hannah, you're still you. The wheelchair doesn't define you. It's a tool you use to navigate the world, but it's not who you are. You're smart and talented and funny and beautiful. Any man who can't see that is an idiot. Hannah looked into Lucas's eyes and saw only sincerity. No pity, no doubt, just absolute certainty that she was valuable and worthy. Come to the gala with me, Lucas said, not because I need a date, but because I want to show the world the incredible woman I've had the privilege of knowing these past 2 months. And maybe it'll help you see what I see, that you have nothing to be ashamed of. Hannah hesitated, fear and hope warring inside her. Finally, she nodded. Okay, I'll go. Lucas smiled and kissed her hands. Thank you. The week leading up to the gala, Hannah was a bundle of nerves. She bought a new dress online, a shimmering silver gown that draped elegantly even while she was seated. She made an appointment at a salon to have her hair and makeup done professionally. She told herself repeatedly that this wasn't like the wedding. This was different. Lucas would be with her. She was choosing this. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. Lucas picked Hannah up at 6 o'clock, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored black tuxedo. His eyes widened when he saw Hannah in her silver dress, her dark hair styled in an elegant updo. You look absolutely stunning, he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. You don't look so bad yourself, Hannah replied, trying to calm her racing heart. The gala was being held at a large hotel conference center about 40 minutes away. Lucas drove carefully, keeping up a steady stream of conversation to distract Hannah from her anxiety. When they arrived, Lucas handed his keys to the valet and came around to help Hannah out of the car. The hotel had a proper accessible entrance with automatic doors. Inside, the conference center had been transformed into an elegant ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Round tables covered in white linen surrounded a dance floor. A stage at the far end of the room featured a podium and large screens. Waiters in black vests circulated with trays of champagne and appetizers. There were easily 300 people in attendance, business executives in expensive suits, society women in designer gowns, local politicians and community leaders. As Lucas and Hannah entered the ballroom, heads began to turn. Hannah felt her anxiety spike, expecting to see pity or judgment in those turning faces. But what she saw instead surprised her. People were looking at her dress, at her hair, at the way she carried herself with confidence despite the wheelchair. They were looking at her the way people look at anyone arriving at a fancy event, with curiosity and assessment, but not with pity. Lucas kept his hand on Hannah's shoulder as they moved through the crowd. He introduced her to several people, a city councilwoman, a local business owner, the director of the youth center the gala was supporting. Each person greeted Hannah with genuine warmth. They asked about her work as a graphic designer. They complimented her dress. They treated her like a person, not a tragedy. Hannah started to relax slightly. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Lucas excused himself briefly to speak with the event organizer about something. Hannah wheeled herself toward the refreshment table, thinking she'd get some water. And that's when she saw him, Ryan Blake, standing near the bar, laughing with a group of men in expensive suits. Hannah's heart stopped. Her hands froze on her wheelchair's controls. She felt like she couldn't breathe. What was Ryan doing here? How was this possible? She was 40 minutes from Seabrook in a completely different town at an event she'd only learned about a week ago. Ryan couldn't be here. This couldn't be happening. But it was happening. Ryan turned slightly and his eyes landed on Hannah. His face went completely white. His champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ryan excused himself from his group and walked directly toward Hannah. Hannah wanted to flee. She wanted to turn her wheelchair around and find Lucas and leave immediately. But something kept her rooted in place. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the fact that she looked absolutely beautiful tonight, and Ryan could see exactly what he'd thrown away. "Hannah," Ryan said when he reached her, his voice uncertain. "I can't believe... What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Hannah replied, keeping her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm here with a business associate," Ryan said, gesturing vaguely toward the group he'd been standing with. "My company has connections to some of the sponsors. I didn't expect... I heard you'd left town, but I didn't know where you'd gone." "I moved to Oregon," Hannah said simply. Ryan looked at her dress, at her professionally styled hair, at the confidence in her posture that definitely hadn't been there 6 months ago. "You look different," he said. Hannah gave him a cold smile. "Different? You should have expected that. I've learned to stand tall even when I can't stand at all." Ryan flinched at the barb. "Hannah, I know you probably hate me. You have every right to. What I did at the wedding..." "You mean abandoning me at the altar in front of 200 people?" Hannah interrupted. "You mean telling me you couldn't marry someone like this? You mean proving that your love was conditional on my ability to walk?" "It wasn't like that," Ryan protested weakly. "It was exactly like that," Hannah said. "You promised to stand by me in sickness and in health, but the moment sickness actually showed up, you ran." Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Lucas appeared at Hannah's side. Lucas took in the scene immediately. Hannah's tense posture, the pale man standing in front of her, the tension crackling in the air. "Is everything all right here?" Lucas asked, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. Ryan looked at Lucas, clearly trying to assess who this man was and what his relationship to Hannah might be. "I'm fine," Hannah said, looking up at Lucas. "Lucas, this is Ryan Blake, my ex-fiancé." Understanding flashed across Lucas's face, followed quickly by anger. He looked at Ryan with barely concealed contempt. "Ah, so you're the man who couldn't see Hannah's worth." Ryan bristled. "I don't think that's any of your business." "It became my business the moment I started caring about her," Lucas replied evenly. The two men stared at each other for a tense moment. Then Lucas turned his attention back to Hannah, his expression softening. "There are some people I'd like you to meet. Are you ready?" Hannah nodded gratefully, ready to escape this uncomfortable encounter. But before they could leave, Ryan spoke again. "Hannah, wait. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I was weak and scared and I let my parents influence me when I should have stood by you." "You're right," Hannah said, turning back to face him. "You were weak, you were scared, and you made a choice. You chose your image and your comfort over the woman you claimed to love. But you know what? I'm grateful." Ryan looked stunned. "Grateful?" "Yes," Hannah said firmly, "because if you'd actually married me, I would have spent my life with someone who only loved me conditionally, someone who would abandon me the moment things got hard. You did me a favor by showing me your true character before we made a permanent mistake." She reached over and took Lucas's hand. "And you left space in my life for someone who actually knows how to love another person." Ryan's face flushed with anger or embarrassment, or both. "So that's it? You've just moved on like our 3 years together meant nothing?" "No," Hannah said. "I grieved those 3 years, I cried over them, I mourned the future I thought we'd have. But then I got up and built a new future, one where I'm valued and respected and loved for exactly who I am. You should try it sometime, building something real instead of something based on appearances." She turned her wheelchair away from Ryan without waiting for his response. Lucas walked beside her, his hand still holding hers. As they moved away, Hannah heard Ryan call after her, "I really did love you, you know." Hannah stopped and looked back at him one final time. "No, Ryan. You loved the version of me that fit into your perfect life. You didn't love me. You don't even know what love is." Then she wheeled herself away, leaving Ryan standing alone in the middle of the gala, finally experiencing a fraction of the abandonment he'd inflicted on her. Lucas guided Hannah toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the crowd. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Hannah took a shaky breath. "Actually, yes, I think I am." And she meant it. Facing Ryan hadn't been the devastating experience she'd feared. Instead, she'd felt strong. She'd felt powerful. She'd realized that Ryan's rejection 6 months ago wasn't about her worth as a person. It was about his inability to handle adversity. It was about his weakness, not hers. Lucas cupped her face gently with one hand. "I'm so proud of you. The way you handled that was incredible." "I had a good reason to be strong," Hannah said, looking up at him. "I had you standing beside me." Lucas smiled, and then he leaned down and kissed her. It was their first real kiss. Not a gentle peck on the cheek, but a deep, genuine kiss that communicated everything words couldn't. When they pulled apart, Hannah felt like her heart might burst from her chest. "Lucas," she said quietly, "there's something you should probably know." "What's that?" "I'm falling in love with you." Lucas's face broke into the widest smile Hannah had ever seen. "That's convenient, because I'm already completely in love with you." They kissed again, longer this time, oblivious to the gala happening around them. When they finally returned to the main ballroom, the evening took another unexpected turn. The MC took the stage and asked for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank everyone for attending tonight's gala supporting the Coastal Youth Center. Your generosity will help provide opportunities for hundreds of young people in our community. And now, I'd like to introduce someone who has been one of our most significant supporters for the past 5 years. Please welcome to the stage Lucas Grant, CEO and founder of TechCore Solutions." Hannah's head whipped toward Lucas in shock. "CEO? Founder of TechCore Solutions?" Lucas looked at her with an apologetic expression. "I was going to tell you." "You're a CEO," Hannah whispered urgently as applause filled the ballroom. "Of TechCore Solutions?" TechCore Solutions was one of the biggest technology companies in America. Hannah had designed marketing materials for tech companies before. She knew the industry. TechCore was huge. "I'm sorry," Lucas said quickly. "I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you'd treat me differently if you knew. Everyone treats me differently when they know." "You lied to me," Hannah said, feeling betrayed. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you the whole truth. Everything else was real, Hannah. My feelings for you, our time together, all of it." The MC was gesturing for Lucas to come to the stage. People were starting to stare at them. "We'll talk about this later," Lucas said. "I promise. But I have to go up there right now." He squeezed her hand and then walked toward the stage. Hannah sat there in shock as Lucas took the podium and began speaking about the importance of youth programs and community investment. She barely heard his words. Her mind was reeling. Lucas was a CEO of a billion-dollar company. He'd been hiding in Seabrook, not just to escape chaos, but to escape the massive public life that came with being that powerful, and he'd let Hannah fall for him without telling her any of this. As Lucas spoke, people began approaching Hannah. "You're Lucas's date?" a woman in a designer gown asked, looking at Hannah with new interest. "How did you two meet?" another person inquired. Suddenly, Hannah wasn't just a woman in a wheelchair. She was the woman dating Lucas Grant, CEO, and that came with an entirely different kind of attention. When Lucas finished his speech and returned to Hannah, she could see the worry in his eyes. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Somewhere private?" Hannah nodded, unable to trust her voice. Lucas found an empty conference room off the main ballroom. He closed the door behind them, giving them privacy. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I should have told you who I was from the beginning." "Why didn't you?" Hannah asked, hurt evident in her voice. "Because when I met you, you had no idea who I was. You didn't treat me like a celebrity or a business opportunity. You treated me like a regular person. Do you know how rare that is for me?" Lucas ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "Everyone wants something from me. Everyone has an angle, but you just wanted to have coffee and talk about design and argue about pizza toppings. So you lied by omission," Hannah said. "I didn't think it mattered," Lucas insisted. "I thought I could just be Lucas for a while, just a guy who met an incredible woman. But then I started falling for you, and the longer I waited to tell you, the harder it became." Hannah looked at him. This man she'd fallen in love with, and tried to reconcile the Lucas she knew with Lucas Grant, CEO. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. "Of course," Lucas said. "Tonight, actually. That's why I invited you to this gala. I knew I couldn't hide it anymore once you saw me speak." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I need you to understand something. I didn't fall in love with Lucas Grant, CEO. I fell in love with Lucas, who helped me with a wheelchair ramp and made me laugh and cooked pasta in my tiny kitchen. That's the person I want. Can you be that person, even with all the CEO stuff?" Lucas moved closer, kneeling in front of her wheelchair. "That is who I am, Hannah. The CEO thing is what I do, but it's not who I am. The man you've been spending time with these past 2 months. That's the real me." "No more secrets?" Hannah asked. "No more secrets," Lucas promised. "I'll tell you everything. About my company, about why I was hiding out in Seabrook, about the business fallout with my board. All of it." Hannah studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. She found only sincerity and love. "Okay," she said finally, "but you're going to have to earn my trust back." "I will," Lucas said. "I'll spend as long as it takes proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust." He took her hands in his. "Hannah, I meant what I said earlier. I love you. Not because you're convenient or because you fit into some perfect image of what my life should look like. I love you because you're brilliant and strong, and you make me want to be a better person. The fact that you use a wheelchair doesn't change any of that. If anything, watching you navigate a world that wasn't built for you with such grace and determination just makes me love you more." Hannah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I love you too, even though you're apparently a billionaire CEO who let me pay for coffee like an idiot." Lucas laughed, the tension breaking. "You never actually paid. I always snuck my card to Sophie before you could." "You did what?" "Every single time," Lucas admitted with a grin. Hannah couldn't help but smile despite everything. "You're ridiculous." "I'm in love with you," Lucas corrected. "Same thing," Hannah said, but she was smiling. Lucas pulled her into a kiss, and Hannah felt all the hurt and confusion melt away. When they returned to the gala, Ryan was nowhere to be seen. He'd apparently left shortly after his confrontation with Hannah. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. People were curious about Hannah, but most of them were genuinely kind. A few asked about her work, and she found herself making several potential business connections. By the end of the night, Hannah's head was spinning, but in a good way. As Lucas drove her home, Hannah reflected on everything that had happened. She'd faced Ryan and realized he had no power over her anymore. She'd learned Lucas's secret and chosen to forgive him. She'd attended her first major social event since the wedding disaster, and not only survived, but thrived. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, glancing over at her. "I'm thinking about how 6 months ago I thought my life was over," Hannah said. "I thought being in a wheelchair meant I'd never be loved or valued or seen as a whole person. Ryan's rejection confirmed all my worst fears. And now," Lucas prompted, "now I realize that Ryan's rejection wasn't about me," Hannah said. "It was about him being too small and too weak to love someone through adversity. And his rejection made space for you, someone who knows how to actually love another person." Lucas reached over and took her hand. "I'm the lucky one, Hannah. You taught me what real strength looks like." Over the following months, Lucas and Hannah's relationship continued to deepen. Lucas officially moved to Seabrook permanently, choosing to run his company remotely rather than return to the chaos of New York. He bought a house on the beach with plenty of space and complete accessibility. Hannah moved in with him 6 months after that first coffee shop encounter. TechCore Solutions launched a new initiative focused on accessibility technology, and Hannah became the lead designer. Her work helped create products that made life easier for people with disabilities. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. One evening, almost exactly a year after they'd met, Lucas took Hannah back to the spot where he'd first helped her with the wheelchair ramp outside the coastal grind. "I want to tell you something," Lucas said as they watched the sunset over the ocean. "What's that?" Hannah asked. "A year ago I was hiding in this town because I'd lost faith in people. My business partners had betrayed me. My board was trying to force me out of my own company. I was cynical and bitter and convinced that everyone just wanted something from me." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "And then I met you. You were struggling with a ramp, and I helped you, and you looked at me like I was just a regular person doing a decent thing. Not a CEO, not a billionaire, just a person. You were just a person," Hannah said softly. "You reminded me what that felt like," Lucas continued. "And you reminded me what love is supposed to be. Not transactional, not based on what someone can do for you. Just genuine connection between two people who see each other." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Hannah's breath caught. "Hannah Cooper," Lucas said, opening the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. "Will you marry me? Not because it makes sense for my image or because you fit into some perfect plan, but because I love you completely and entirely, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Hannah looked at the ring, at Lucas's face, at the future stretching out before them. A year ago, she'd sat at an altar and been told she wasn't enough. Now she was being asked to marry a man who saw her as everything. "Yes," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as the sun set over the ocean. 6 months later, they were married on the beach in Seabrook. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family. Hannah's parents were there, her mother crying happy tears this time. Lucas's mother flew in from the East Coast and immediately fell in love with Hannah. There was no church aisle to navigate, no 200 guests judging her. Just sand and ocean and the man she loved waiting for her at the end of a short path. Hannah wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. Lucas wore khakis and a white shirt and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. When the officiant asked if Lucas took Hannah to be his wife, he said, "I do," without a moment's hesitation. When it was Hannah's turn, she looked at Lucas and said, "I do, in sickness and in health, in wheelchairs and in walking, in CEO boardrooms and in small coffee shops. I do." Everyone laughed and cried at the same time. When they kissed, their friends and family cheered. And Hannah realized something profound. A year and a half ago, she'd been left at an altar because a weak man couldn't love her through adversity. Today she was married to a strong man who'd proven over and over again that real love doesn't give up when things get difficult. The wheelchair that Ryan had seen as a deal-breaker, Lucas had seen as just part of who Hannah was. Not a defining characteristic, not a tragedy, just one aspect of a complex, wonderful human being. At the reception, as Hannah and Lucas danced, Lucas gently swaying while Hannah's wheelchair became part of their movement, Hannah caught sight of her reflection in a window. She saw a woman in a white dress, a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt herself, a woman who'd learned that her worth wasn't determined by her ability to walk or by whether someone chose to love her, a woman who'd found real love with someone who saw her completely. She looked up at Lucas and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Hannah replied. "Me too," Lucas said, kissing her forehead. And in that moment, surrounded by people who loved them, with the ocean breeze carrying the sound of laughter and music, Hannah Cooper, now Hannah Grant, understood a truth that had taken her a long journey to learn. Real love doesn't need you to be perfect. It doesn't require you to walk or to fit into someone else's image of what a life partner should be. Real love just shows up. It pushes your wheelchair up a slippery ramp without making a big deal about it. It cooks pasta in your tiny kitchen. It stands beside you when you confront the person who hurt you. It chooses you every single day, exactly as you are, And that kind of love, the real kind, is worth waiting for. If this story touched your heart, I want to hear from you right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Have you ever had someone reject you for something you couldn't control? Have you ever found love when you'd given up hope? Have you ever had to learn that your worth isn't determined by other people's limitations? I read every single comment, and I want to know your story. Because stories like Hannah's, stories about overcoming rejection and finding real love, they matter. They remind us that we're not alone. They remind us that the right person will love us exactly as we are. They remind us that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us makes space for the best thing. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do that right now. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that will touch your heart. Like this video, if Hannah's journey meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that they're worthy of real love. Because everyone deserves to know that their worth isn't measured by what they can or can't do. Everyone deserves to know that the right person will see them completely. Everyone deserves a love story that chooses them exactly as they are. Thank you so much for watching Hannah and Lucas's story. Thank you for letting their journey into your heart. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself. Believe in second chances. Believe in real love. And always remember, you are worthy exactly as you are. Until next time.